So, good morning, everyone. My name is Aadhidhya Shreevatsav, and today I'm here to share a story that changed how I saw myself and will maybe change how you see yourself too. For most of my life, I lived something that many considered to be the picture perfect life. Things were good, comfortable, and predictable. I was the type of person who found happiness in the little things. Something as simple as maybe a quiet walk after school, a good grade on a paper, or just the calm after exams. I never really thought about resilience or loss because the truth is, I never really had to. Life had always just flowed. So, if anyone ever asked me what the lowest point in my life was, you'd probably expect me to say something light. Something like missing an assignment, losing a tournament, or maybe messing up a line on stage. Nothing major, nothing that really shook anything. But that changed in August 2024. It was 5:50 in the morning when my mother woke me up. She stood by the door wide awake but quiet. And somehow I could just tell that something was not right. When I asked her what happened, she broke the news to me that two of our close relatives had passed away in a car accident just hours earlier. I didn't react, not immediately. But the world somehow just went silent, almost like someone had turned down the volume on everything. The next few days passed in fragments, people talking, lights, condolences, but it all just felt distant, almost like I was watching a movie that I didn't quite belong in. At the time, I thought the numbness was strength. I thought staying unaffected meant I was handling it well. But here's the truth, right? Grief doesn't necessarily announce itself. It waits, and it shows up in the little things, in irritation, in distance, and in silence. Now, over the next few weeks, I made choices. Choices that didn't quite feel like mine. I snapped at people who didn't deserve it. I distanced myself purely because I didn't want to bother anyone with what I had going on. And finally, when the dust settled and everything was over, I realized that I wasn't left with just guilt, but also with regret. Because the person I'd been during this time didn't feel like me. And the hardest part wasn't understanding that I had lost a loved one. It was understanding that momentarily I had lost myself too. And that's when the real struggle began. By the time September came along, I found myself asking questions. Questions like maybe I am a bad person, maybe I did deserve this, or maybe I'll always keep making mistakes of this sort. And it was strange because I wasn't really the type of person to have thoughts of this nature. And that's when I realized the grief had sort of morphed into a different type of pain, which was self doubt. Around this time, I started thinking a lot about resilience. What it looked like when life actually stopped being easy. And strangely, my thoughts kept taking me back to someone I had looked up to for years, and that was Virat Kohli. Now, I have admired him for as long as I can remember. Not for the records or the passion or the aggression, but for something much quieter. There's this rare honesty about him. You can see it in the way he carries both his highs and his lows, in the way he doesn't hide from failure. And what stood out to me the most was when he went through that long, rough patch in 2019. It wasn't his comeback, but it was the way he spoke about it. How he said he lost himself trying to live up to who he thought he had to be, and how long it took for him to actually rediscover who he was. And that line stayed with me. Because isn't that what so many of us go through too? We build these versions of ourselves, polished, composed, and sorted, and somewhere along the way, we start performing them. And when things finally fall apart and come crashing down, we don't just lose our balance, we also lose this version of ourselves that we've been working so hard to protect in the first place. I think that's what made me admire him even more. Not because he was able to bounce back, but because he was able to admit and truly accept that even the strongest people sometimes lose sight of themselves. And finding your way back, it doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. That's when I realized something important, something I wish someone had told me a long, long time ago. Mistakes don't define you, it's the story that you tell after it. When you're hurt, your mind does this cruel thing. It rewrites the narrative. It convinces you that the version of you who broke under pressure is your real self. It's sort of like looking into a cracked mirror. The reflection is distorted, But since it's yours, you tend to believe it anyways. And the harsh part is, when your mind turns against you, you can't run away from it. You live with it day after day, while every thought feels like a verdict and every quiet moment feels like a trial. For a while, I thought I was the only person who felt this way. And the more I talked to people, is the more I realized that it's not rare at all. Because we all know what it's like to act out of confusion or anger or fear and then carry the guilt long after the moment has passed. You say something you didn't mean, you withdraw, you regret, and suddenly that moment becomes your definition. And that's what vulnerability does. It convinces you that who you are at your lowest moments is your most honest self. And what sort of made it harder is the irony. When we are at our lowest is when our self judgment is at its loudest. Ironically, when we need compassion the most is when we are willing to give it to ourselves the least. And slowly, I also began to feel like the way the people around me were seeing me started to change too. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe that wasn't the case. But when your self perception begins to crack, one thing that happens is even the most neutral of faces start to look like the pinnacle of judgment. And that happens to a lot of us. When we think less of ourselves, we find reasons to convince ourselves that others do too. And that becomes proof. Proof that maybe we are right about our worst thoughts all along. And around that time, one of my closest friends told me something. Something that completely changed how I saw the situation. He said, "The people who truly know you, love you, and care about you are going to continue to do so anyways. The people who won't, either they don't matter to you or you don't matter to them. So why bother?" At first, it sounded simple, almost too simple for what I was feeling. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had spent so much time focusing on who I wasn't that I forgot that there were people out there, people who loved me for me, who knew who I was and were able to see me even when I couldn't see myself clearly. And those people weren't seeing me for the polished version of myself that I had presented to the world, but who I was underneath. And I think that's something we all tend to forget sometimes. We try so hard to prove that we are good, worthy, and put together that we sort of start performing for people who might not ever understand what we are like in the first place. And that conversation made me realize that not everyone's opinion deserves space in your head. Because there are some people out there who will always view you through the lens of your mistake. And that's fine. Because the people who truly matter, the people who are truly here for you, won't look at you from the perspective of what you did wrong, but what you're quietly rebuilding. For months, I stayed in that loop, reanalyzing, regretting, and it's truly exhausting, isn't it? The constant mental spiral of what I should have done or what I could have done. And here's something I learned eventually. Guilt at times feels productive. What happens is it makes you think that feeling bad is the same as making things better. But here's the truth, it's not. Healing doesn't necessarily begin when you start forgetting, but rather it begins when you start understanding, when you're able to ask, why did I act that way instead of why did I do that? And that shift completely changed everything for me because I realized I wasn't a bad person. I was just a person who made a mistake while trying to handle grief. And that's the part most of us forget. We don't judge ourselves based on our intentions, we judge ourselves on our reaction. For example, we fail a test and think I'm an idiot. We forget to reply to a message and think I'm a bad friend. We turn temporary moments into permanent labels. But make no mistake, no moment and no reaction is big enough to define who you are unless you let it. Once I saw that clearly, I was able to make a promise to myself to stop judging my life from inside the storm and to wait for the calm before deciding what actually happened. And slowly, I was able to begin to rebuild without any noise. I could start reading again, reaching out again, and I could also start reflecting without spiraling. And over time, I realized something that still stays with me today. Introspection without forgiveness is just self destruction in disguise. Essentially, forgiving yourself doesn't mean saying it's okay. It means saying it happened and I understand why. That understanding changed the way I approached everything: school, relationships, leadership, and even ambition. Because growth doesn't come from getting things right, It comes from getting things wrong and understanding why we got them wrong in the first place. We are told to chase perfection, to stay composed, collected, and mature, but maturity isn't essentially about never breaking. It's about learning how to rebuild without losing kindness in the process. And what really is kindness? Well, wisdom, for example, is something that doesn't come from control, it comes from honesty. Because something like knowledge, information, it can tell you what to do, but only wisdom can tell you what not to do. I remember a friend once asked me, why should I go out, approach people, and develop my social skills that way when I can sit at home and just read a book? The book in question was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which, by the way, is a lovely book. But what him and many of us need to understand is that reading a book can only give you information, it can give you knowledge, it can only tell you what you need to do. But only living life can give you perspective, only failing can give you understanding, and only forgiving yourself for those very failures can give you true peace. That mindset made me start saying yes to things I would have once avoided. One of them was a crowdfunding campaign that went on to raise over 3 lakhs for underprivileged kids and the elderly across the city. To me, however, that was not an act of service. Moreover, it was proof. Proof that I could still do good even if I had once done wrong. And the experience taught me something the mirror never could. We are not defined by the versions of ourselves that broke. We are defined by the versions of ourselves that decided to stand back up and fight for something. The moments that don't break us don't destroy us. They instead reveal us. They show us that the distance between who we are and who we think we are. And once you understand the distance, you can stop pretending and start understanding. Looking back now, I don't resent that period of my life actually. I'm really grateful for it because it forced me to meet myself, not the polished version I'd built for the world, but who I was underneath all along. And that version had its imperfections, but at least it was honest. And that's where real growth begins. Fyodor Dostoevsky once said that pain and suffering are inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. But he also believed that through suffering, we begin to understand ourselves. Not the perfect version we portray to the world, but who we truly are underneath the covers. I think that's where real growth begins. When you stop trying to control every version of you and try to start understanding them. When you stop hiding your flaws and start accepting them as proof that you actually have lived. Because once you understand yourself, your strength, your fragility, your mistakes, and for that matter, you stop pretending to be whole. You start being human. So, if there's one thing I'd like you to take from this, when you make mistakes in a vulnerable state, don't mistake your reactions for your identity. Because you're not a bad person for breaking under pressure. You're just someone who's learning to carry it better next time. The mirror we look into every morning shows us our face, but not our fight. It reflects expression, but not effort. It misses the quiet days you felt empty but showed up anyways, the moments you forgave yourself silently and kept going. Because what the mirror misses isn't what we actually are. It's rather the strength, the resilience, and the wisdom that's quietly being created through experience. Thank you.